everyone, before we get started, just a couple quick announcements. First, we now have self-study CE courses available on our website. Right now, we only have one course set up as kind of our pilot. It's the structure and dynamics of the psyche with Gus Swick. And there's actually a podcast episode for the first half of that lecture. So if you're not sure if you're interested, you can look that one up and begin listening to it. The rest is available on the website. And then the CE course portion, which is basically just a quiz, is available for an additional fee, and it's linked on the recording page, as well as if you go to our public programs page on the website, there's a self-study section, and it will be there. Other self-study courses will also be added there when I have time to upload the quizzes. We have a bunch already completed, so it's just a matter of finding time to add those. If you want to be updated on when new courses have been added, join our mailing list, and I'll include a section about self-study quizzes that have been added in the sidebar of emails going forward. Also, the Jungian Psychotherapy Program and Jungian Studies programs are 2-year in-person weekend programs, are accepting applications, and we've already received a bunch, and it's a rolling admissions process. So the first 30 will be viewed, and then everyone else will be put on a wait list. So if you want to reserve your space, apply as soon as possible. The programs run from October 2023 to June 2025. And if you would like to learn more about the programs, just go to our website. Thanks. Welcome to the Jungian Anthology podcast from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. In this episode of Healing Cinema, Jungian Analysts Judith Cooper and Danielle Ross discuss the film Elegy. I'll let them introduce the film, so let's just jump right in.
Here we are, we're our next film up. It's been a while, but it's great to be back. The film is a relatively old one, not really old. And it's not a classic. I don't think it's a very well-known film, but I always loved it. It's called Elegy from 2008. And this is a brief summary of the film. And again, we recommend for our listeners that they watch the film and then come back and listen to the podcast, because this, obviously we're going to be talking about all kinds of things that happen in the film. So if you don't like spoilers, you want to see the film first.
Yeah.
So it's a story of, it focuses on the male main character is David Kepes, who's played in the film by Ben Kingsley of Gandhi fame. Very different role here. He's a 62-year-old divorced college literature professor, cultural critic on the radio, with one adult son from whom he is estranged or with whom he is in chronic conflict. David has no interest in, quote, the prison of monogamous marriage, and instead he chooses to have an affair every year with one of his students, waiting until classes end. When he chooses a sophisticated 24-year-old Cuban-American former student, Consuela Castillo, played by Penelope Cruz, he finds himself falling in love and becoming unusually, for him, attached to her. The plot thickens with David decompensating into jealous possessiveness. The affair with this woman upends his life, as we'll be talking about, and his sense of a reliable self. His trusted friend George, played by Dennis Hopper, warns him not to become overly attached to this younger woman. So Dan and I have both also read the book that this is a screen adaptation of by Philip Roth, a Philip Roth novel called The Dying Animal. And just to say, too, that it's a female director of this film. She's Catalan. Her name is Isabel. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. Coixet, I think.
Yeah.
Isabel Coixet. So we're going to be talking too, I hope, about how this film, based on a novel written by a man, the film directed by a woman, may change the feeling of the story. So,
and just to add, it was written. The screenplay was written by Nicholas Meyer.
Yes.
And I've seen some of his other movies.
He's pretty well known.
He's pretty well known screenwriter, yeah. But this is interesting to me. I'll jump right into this idea that, because I had the same experience with The Lost Daughter, between the film and the film. To me, tries to finish something that is left, I think, deliberately unfinished in the book. In other words, the tension in the book that rises to this dialogue, not just with George, now that George eventually dies, and now he's having dialogue with the George voice in him, right?
Right.
About whether to go to Consuela, who is dying, and this the discernment or discrimination of these two parts of him, whether to go to her or to stay in his life as this committed Don Juan or whatever we want to call him.
Yeah.
And his last line is, "If you go, you're finished."
Yeah, in the book, the last line.
In the book.
Yes.
And the ending in the others is completely different. It has this feel of trying to collapse the tension that's left over, and whether that's the screenplay writer or the director or a combination of the two, because somehow we get the sense, now David is is a complete man. He's breaking down. He's he's in love with this woman. He's at her bedside, after surgery, and
Yes. We're left hanging, except I think, and I hope we'll get to this, that there's lines in the film that suggest otherwise.
Okay.
As well. But I think that's a great point, that maybe it's up, as you often say, it's left to the viewer to figure out where the tension is, and like we're doing, and how to resolve the tension, if at all, if possible. But yeah. So
I started with the end. Let's go. Let's go to the beginning.
Yeah. And we're already in the realm of death here. Because elegy the word means lament for the dead, what's dying or what has died. The book is called The Dying Animal. And it turns out it is a meditation on aging.
Yes.
And mortality, along with this, I think, what I would like to call toxic masculinity of David, the character. Or, so I also like to say, love in the time of patriarchy.
Yes.
What that does to love. I think it's really funny to me now. The opening scene is David being interviewed by Charlie Rose, the TV host. Charlie Rose is a victim of Me Too.
Yes.
And with multiple sexual harassment allegations. He's, got fired from whatever, CBS or PBS. And so I think that's really an ironic touch.
It really is. The real life character, right? David Kopesh is a character, but Charlie Rose actually lived that kind of life, using his power to seduce women, or try to anyway, and using his power to assault women too. Yeah. So that's a very interesting.
Yeah.
If we had talked about this when it came out, we wouldn't have known any of that.
No, we wouldn't have. That's right. Much like Weinstein, it was all hidden, relatively hidden. So they're in the. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just the the difference in titles kind of speaks to what I was talking about before. The Dying Animal is from a poem by Yeats, Sailing to Byzantium, which is Yeats' meditation on his mortality. And I forget the quote exactly, but it's, yes, here it is. This is the stanza. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal, it knows not what it is. So this is Yeats, in Byzantium, in marveling and idealizing the image of the gold enameled buildings that for him was an image of immortality and transcending the mortal body, right? And his disdain for the body here is, strapped to a dying animal. That sums up his relationship to his body. Is very interesting here, right?
So the need to disengage from that, just deny that.
Yeah. Which I don't think is playing out with Kepesh, with the character, because I think he is, despite his language and despite his description in the pornography in his language, I think he's moving towards some type of transcendence where the body and the spirit are merged. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He is aware that he's aging. He has those great lines in the beginning. He quotes the famous Betty Davis line, "Old age is not for sissies." Yeah. And he also quotes the line by Tolstoy, this is all in a voiceover. The biggest surprise in a man's life is old age. And even in the book, the epigraph in the book by the novelist Edna O'Brien is, "The body contains the life story just as much as the brain." So
I like that.
Yeah, so you can't escape the body.
Right.
And I read a quote somewhere where to call it instincts is diluting the reality that we're an animal. We're in the body. We're in a body. So he's the character is aware that this is happening, but he's still in this denial process, and he's not. And we will go through, because I think there's a way he seesaws back and forth with recognition and then pulls back.
Yes.
From that recognition that he's going to die, and maybe he should grow up, like George says to him at some point. Don't worry about growing old. Worry about growing up. Yes.
But George is an interesting character, because at the same time he elevates David. You're the professor of love. You got quite the life here. You don't want to get married. You don't want to get attached to anybody. Yet he's married. Yeah. And there's a line early on in which he's telling David, that he's discovered a new level in his relationship with his wife, this, which was very interesting and kind of, paradoxical to how George, wants to keep David from moving into his mortality of growing up. You know what I mean? There's kind of a paradox there.
There is. It's both. They're full of contradictions, both of them. Or you can watch the seesawing back and forth, because there's that late scene in the movie where Consuela and David are out walking on the street, and Consuela sees George in a restaurant or bar with another woman.
Yes.
And she brings this to David. Isn't that your friend? What do you think about that?
Yeah.
So he may be talking more to his wife, but he's acting out.
He's doing the same thing. Yeah.
He's acting out too.
As if, just from a metaphoric standpoint, this is the symbol of the split, right? Mm-hmm. That he can't bring the erotic to his marriage. Right.
The spiritual, and I think we'll talk about this. Hopefully, the way sexuality it contains the spiritual, which we've lost.
Yes.
In the culture.
Yes.
I think to use the word split is really important.
Yeah.
Things are just split, and this is a story of that split.
And in The Sacred Prostitute, which is a book I'll reference, Nancy Qualls Corbett, the foreword to the Sacred Prostitute, Eternal Aspect of the Feminine, there's a foreword by Marion Woodman that I just want to quote very, very briefly at the end of the foreword. She's speaking to exactly what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. So long as we are unconscious of the divinity inherent in matter, sexuality can be manipulated to fulfill ego desire. Mm-hmm. The sacred prostitute is not present, nor is the goddess being invoked. Instead of manifesting as a transformative power that can mediate between wounded instinct and the radiance of the divine, the goddess is called upon to justify lust and sexual license. And she's really providing a postscript to the entire book, which was about how in ancient times sex was elevated. Mm-hmm. It was divine. It was the Eros Gamos, the sacred Great wedding. Mm-hmm. And the priest, the sacred prostitute was somebody like, that we talked about from the story of Gilgamesh, going back to the Sumerian times, was a elevated woman whose sexuality was required to bring to serve the goddess of love, to mediate the goddess of love and goddess of fertility. Interestingly, on New Year's, the beginning of the summer solstice. Isn't that interesting? And the book takes place, rises to a crescendo or a completion on New Year's, which I thought was interesting.
Wow, I got the chills. What a connection there, Dan. Yeah. It's the film too. That's in the film. She comes back to see him on New Year's Eve.
Yes.
And we've talked about in our previous discussions about this, how she was like an Aphrodite. Yeah. She was this, Penelope Cruz is absolutely stunning in this film. And she's a beautiful woman, and she's like a goddess. And she, to me, she's like this trickster archetypal energy sent to awaken him to the spiritual aspects of sexuality, which he has split off in his life. He only wants sex and no strings attached sex, which is so common still.
It is.
In this pornographically drenched culture that we live in.
Yes.
So I hope you reference that book more. That's the whole idea of the sacred prostitute. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, when we first started talking about this and you brought it up, and I know the book title, I've never read the book yet. Mm-hmm. I want to get it now that you quoted this great quote by Marion Woodman, but as a feminist, it's like, I'm not sure I want to go there and elevate this exploitation. However, archetypally, it's this whole other level that you're saying that is so crucial that we've lost.
It reminds me, this all roads lead to this for me, and that is the whole, my whole training, this whole analytic experience and pedagogy has been around discovery of the divine, and that we're really in service to that. We lost that, centuries ago, and but that's what's missing. And, so when you imagine how wise the ancients were in how they saw sexuality, was in service to the divine, and to the fertility of the soil, and in preparation for for farming, it reminds me that we are in service in our analytic work, in our clinical work, to this divine, that it's we're just playing a part, just like the sacred prostitute is playing a part, just like the stranger, the sacred other, because the stranger, so as the story went, the maiden, before she was married, would go to the temple, and as the sacred prostitute, or taking on that role, which meant that she was representing the goddess of Inanna, Ishtar, Aphrodite, all of them, that she representing, the stranger was representing as an emissary of the god. So the sacred prostitute is representing the goddess, and there you have the sacred union, the sacred wedding. That all was in service of the divine. In fact, the stranger would leave money, but the money was not for the woman. The money was for the goddess, for the sacred rite, for the temple, right? And then that all got devolved into prostitution, which was which became it took all the sacred elements and divine elements out of it.
Let's not forget too, or let's not overlook that it's not only the divine. I mean, that's huge enough. I mean,
right.
That's the huge thing, right? But when you say the spiritual, it's also elevating the feminine.
Yes.
And so that's what's missing too in as we know, in our culture and in the story, that he just reduces her to a body, sexual body, a sexual object, really, even though once he falls in love with her, he's caught and doesn't know how to manage and bring those two together.
That's so interesting. So it starts out as his seduction of her, which he tells over and over. He does with over hundreds of women from after class was over. But it becomes her seduction of him.
Yeah. He is totally becomes possessed and obsessed with owning her and jealous, and she stays grounded. Her character is fascinating. What he's attracted to in her, he talks about as a voiceover, and in the book you read how he sees her as the writing is gorgeous. Let me see if I can find the exact words. He says something about the potency of her stillness was enormous.
Yes.
The potency of her stillness. She's this self-contained, self-possessed woman.
Yes.
Who he says she doesn't know the power she has.
Yes.
Which is also attractive to her.
Yes.
To him, rather.
I'm not sure that's true, because he's coming at it from a logos attitude, and she's coming at it from an Eros attitude. You know what I mean? Yeah. So when he said that she doesn't know, because he makes several remarks that she doesn't know what she's doing, or and I thought that was demeaning, and she carries a wisdom that may not be logos, right?
Exactly. And we find out that she wants something from him in that, wisdom is a good word, because she's trying to unite. That's what Eros does. It unites the opposites. It unites what's split off in a related way. And that's what she's bringing to him. And that's what he can't awaken to.
Yeah. One of the things in the book, The Sacred Prostitute, is they talk about the difference in what virgin historically meant in ancient times. The virgin meant a woman who is self-possessed, a woman whose womanhood is not dependent on a man, is not defined by a man.
Well, that's the virgin goddesses, right?
That's the virgin
Artemis,
goddesses.
They're one in themselves.
And she carries that, and that's part of what he's fascinated with.
Yes, yeah. So what that says to me too is this gets into this whole area of attachment, right? And dependency and independence. Because there's many lines in both the book and the film about how he has struggled to always maintain his independence.
Yes.
He's what in our field we call counter-dependent. He's so phobic about dependency that he can't let anything interfere with that independence. And falling in love upends all of that. And that's what Eros does.
Yeah, true.
And that's what the trickster does too. It upends his sense of his confidence. He talks about this. His confidence is gone when he falls in love with her. He becomes completely he follows it. There's a scene where she says, I'm going out dancing with my brother. And he looks up the bar and he follows, he shows up and there she is. And she confronts him. She says, what are you doing here? And then later, and then she doesn't call him for 2 days or something like that. Right. And then she calls and they meet and she says to him, you're going to have to learn how to trust me. Don't ruin our relationship by your jealousy.
This is so interesting. He really struggled with this, and perhaps Roth did too, because what he wanted from her was for her to be obsessed with his cock.
Yes, he has a great line.
I'll say it. I apologize. There's going to be a lot of profanity in this, but in the way that he was obsessed with her breasts.
Right.
But that's not what she was about.
No.
She was about something else, and it just drove him crazy that he couldn't get that.
Yeah. That's so great to relate it to his fascination with her breasts. Because he's got this great line, how he says, this is a woman who will say 1,000 times, I adore you, but will never talk about his cock. That was the quote. And he's mesmerized by her breasts. And it's so fetishized. He says outright, he says, I worship them. I worship them. And so he's bringing in the sacred, but not in the way we're talking about.
I hear that, but it changes in her because she loves his adoration. She, whatever she is falling in love with, part of it has to be this adoration, because she eventually needs him to re-enliven that at the end of the story to and then it became for her also about the breast. So there's something in his objectification. There's two ways of looking at this. You can look at this, which is, I think, Roger Ebert's review was, I started reading Zuckerman. I got so tired of, the F-bombs that he was throwing and this misogyny. Another series with the same character. He goes, and he was reading that prior to writing the review for Elegy. And he says, I'm sorry, Phil. I couldn't continue. Right. So that's, if we got to get past the pornography, the language, to really, I think, understand what's going on here. This man is really suffering.
Yeah. But, from that, I'm so glad you brought this up, because from a female point of view, the storyline is right. She goes back to him on New Year's Eve after a break of two or 3 years, where he says he finally got over the loss, because she breaks off. I hope we'll get to that, because she breaks off Consuela breaks off the relationship for a very important reason, which we'll come back to.
Yes.
But she goes back to him because she's gotten this diagnosis of breast cancer, and she's about to have surgery to have her breasts removed. And she goes back to David because he worshipped her breasts, and she wants to be, like you said, reanimated with that, and to feel the loss, and she wants to have the loss balanced out by that love that he had for her breasts. Well, I think what's going on there is that there's a lot of talk in the film about beauty, and there's a line right from the get-go. He's vulnerable to beauty, and he's transfixed by her beauty. And I mean, let's set aside for a minute the idea that is a symbol of youth in the culture. That only young people can be beautiful. I mean, older people are not. The beauty of old age is not named, and that has everything to do with death, I think. So, he's denying the whole issue of aging and mortality. However, I think for women, George said it. George, he has this. I think it's. George says, "Beautiful women are invisible.
Visible, yes.
You don't actually see the person," and that's right on.
Yes.
And he talks about. He says, this is, I think, brilliant. We see the beautiful shell. We're blocked by the beauty barrier.
Yes.
And we're so dazzled by the outside, we never make it inside to the person. And then later in the film, after George has a stroke and dies, his friend, David has a conversation with George along these same lines, where George says to David in his head, "Did you ever see her? I mean, all of her." Yeah. And David says, "I didn't understand what I saw." And then, interestingly, Consuela says to David in the hospital, "I didn't think you would come because I'm no longer beautiful."
Yes.
And the point I want to make is that for women get caught too in that beauty barrier. I've treated women. I remember one woman I treated who was model gorgeous. She felt like a monster. She also had a trauma history. But women get caught by this beauty barrier, and because the culture, we know that in social psych, they do all these studies that if you're beautiful, you can be more successful in life.
Yes.
You get the job, you get the guy, you get the other woman, So it's an issue in the culture.
Yeah, I agree.
So he gets there, and I think that was just really great to read.
Yes.
In this very kind of misogynistic book that's trying to get somewhere else. With love.
Yes. He's struggling. He really is struggling in seeing her all the way in the book, all the way to the end. I think the movie resolves that. And this, her struggle with identification with this goddess image, and her love of this goddess image that he is worshiping. But there's a part of her that is trying to break into her humanness, into her whole-bodied womanhood. Right?
Absolutely. She's trying to bring him along to get to a related place that is not just about sex.
Yes.
There is a split between sexuality and emotional relatedness.
Yes.
So let's go back to how they break up, because it's so important. So the story unfolds, and we learn that they're in this relationship for like a year and a half. I think he makes and there's a scene in a restaurant where Consuela says to him, I want to ask you something. My parents are throwing me a graduation party. She's graduating with a graduate degree, and I want you to come. And you didn't come when I invited you to Thanksgiving, and I did. And my parents are saying, who is this mystery man that you're dating? They want to meet you. It's important for you to come to this party.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is he says yes, and he will be there. And she is just ecstatic. She's really happy.
Mm-hmm.
And we see one of the next scenes is he's in his car, and he's on the phone saying to her, oh, I got stuck in traffic. I'm not going to be able to make it. By the time I get there, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
And he's lied. He's lying.
And she knows it.
She knows it. She's completely disappointed and starts crying on the phone. And we learn later that she broke it off.
Yeah.
At that point, she broke it off.
Yeah.
And this is until, she comes back to him
right.
2 years later
right.
with this illness that she's. So there's a line. So your point about how you feel that the film resolved this tension, again, I'm not so sure, because it's not as blatant as in the book, when the last line of the book says, if you go to her in the hospital, you'll be finished.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be lost, basically.
Yes.
In the film, he says in his mind to George, in his fantasies, I think you see it acted out, but I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, there's a line where he's saying it to George. He says, who breaks off a relationship because I didn't attend a graduation party?
He doesn't get it. Yeah.
He doesn't get it, Dan.
Yeah, no, he doesn't get it.
He doesn't get it.
No, you're right. Because he's still enamored with the goddess. A goddess that he has to worship, and he can't let the woman come out of it. He can't let go of the projection. So her normal, he says this line in there. I don't know if it's in the book. It might be in the book. He says, I didn't expect her to be so normal.
Oh, huh.
That's what threw him. Yeah, like, okay, she wants me to come to this party, and well, she wants to celebrate her graduation. She's being initiated. He was part of that initiation. She elevated him because of his brilliance and his knowledge and his culture. And so he couldn't finish the job. I mean, if he's an initiator, he couldn't finish the job. All he had to do was go to this party because he had to hold on to this image, this persona of, that he doesn't need anybody, but he doesn't get what she needs.
Right. And what she needs is emotional intimacy.
Yes.
She wants involvement in her life. She wants him to meet her parents.
Yes.
She wanted to marry him. She was totally in love with him.
Yes.
She wanted a life of emotional intimacy, and he could not give that to her.
Yeah.
And I think I didn't catch this the first time I saw the movie, but the second time, he's in bed with her. So he's complete, on the face of it, it looks like he's completely upended, right? He's crying. She comes to tell him about this diagnosis, and he starts weeping.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a puddle.
Yeah.
And she says to him at some point, you're more panicky than I am. You're more scared than I am.
Yeah.
And because he said to her, did you panic? Were you frightened? And she said, yes, not initially, but then she was. And he's an emotional mess.
Yeah.
And you think, oh my God, he's really changing. He's opened up through the suffering and the loss of her. He's opened up and become a changed person and left his persona behind and wants to be connected to her in an emotional way. So he consults his son, who's a doctor. We haven't talked much about the son relationship, but that's okay. That's interesting, though, in terms of the bitterness and the hatred with the son. But anyway, his son is a doctor. He goes to his son. He finds out what the normal course of, when she'll be out of ICU because of the surgery. He goes to her. Bottom line, he goes to her in the hospital, which is, like you said, very different than the book. He goes to her. He gets in bed with her. He hugs her. She says, "I didn't think you'd come because I'm no longer beautiful." But there's another line with that. I want to find it in my notes because I think it's important. But I just want to finish this up and say that he gets in bed with her, and she has this line where she says, "I will miss you." I will miss you. So she's not taken in by his behavior.
Yes.
Too late, David.
Yes.
Which was so stunning to me because she is not willing to be his teacher in this way anymore. She's just had it.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow.
I will miss you.
He's,
I think my fantasy is he's thinking, I'm changed. I love her. I want to get back in with being in a relationship with her. And I think that the line is, something about, will you still love me when I don't have my breasts? And he never answers her.
And she says, will you want to fuck me if I lose my breast?
There you go.
And he doesn't answer her.
He doesn't answer her.
I'm going, talk. I'm saying, talk. My God, tell her. It reminds me of that poem that I sent you by Robert Haas, the one, if we have time at the end, I get the poem. We can read it because it really speaks to this.
It does. Oh yeah. In fact, read it now, Dan. If you have it handy.
But I think what you're saying is very important here. She knew he wouldn't be able to tolerate her humanness.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. And the tragedy of that, and the tragedy of a lot of men who grow up in this culture that can't relate emotionally.
Yes. There's this movie really speaks to the culture. These are the kinds of movies that you and I like that really bring out something that's going on in the culture.
Yeah. And how we're affected by that in our lives, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives us the opportunity to really amplify some of these themes and to dig under what are the archetypal themes going on here.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, Jung's, spirit of the times versus spirit of the depths, the movie reflects spirit of the times, but there is in that the spirit of the depths that we can dive into.
Right. It's always trying to reveal itself and push through to recognition.
In a good film, in a good film, and the film doesn't have to be great. This film, is good, but it brings out these themes.
Good enough, right?
It's a poem by Robert Haas, and it's called "A Story About the Body." A young composer working that summer at an artist colony had watched her for a week. She was Japanese, a painter, almost 60, and he thought he was in love with her. He loved her work, and her work was like the way she moved her body, used her hands, looked at him directly when she mused, and considered answers to his questions. One night, walking back from a concert, they came to her door, and she turned to him and said, "I think you would like to have me. I would like that too, but I must tell you that I've had a double mastectomy." And when he didn't understand, she said, "I've lost both my breasts." The radiance that he had carried around in his belly and chest cavity, like music, withered quickly, and he made himself look at her when he said, "I'm sorry, I don't think I could." He walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning, he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found, when he picked it up, that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept the corners of the studio, was full of dead beads.
It's stunning.
It really is
stunning. And of course, the bee is a symbol of the goddess.
Yes.
For me, that this whole idea of the breast and how fetishized it is in the culture is so symbolic of men's unprocessed dependency needs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after all, the breast is there to give milk to a child and nourish it. So we have magnified that and turned it into this fetish of sexuality without the humanness, like you said. There's that you probably know this film. It's one of those romantic comedies, Notting Hill, with Hugh Grant and what's her name, Julia Roberts.
Yeah.
And at some point, there's a great scene in there where she says to him, they're in bed, they've connected, and she says to him, "What is it about men and breasts? They're just breasts."
And he didn't have an answer for her.
No, he didn't have an answer for her.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it feels that, we've talked about this in my practice, that men reach a stage in which they don't know it, but they're searching for intimacy, even if that's being prodded by their wives or partners. Because sex now, often, the woman has stopped wanting sex, and because they're looking for an intimacy that they haven't yet experienced, and the man is struggling with that because his only definition of intimacy has been sex. The woman on the other side of the equation doesn't. Her struggle or suffering is in the identification that we're talking about, that their beauty, their worth has been defined by the man, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do they become the full woman? How do they become the self-possessed woman? And so it's like these two sides that are struggling in the same dynamics, same compulsive dynamics, trying to move out of them. And I think our interest in films has been recently how the sexual compulsivities draw people together, but whether or not they can move out of that into deeper relationship, like 9.5 weeks.
Right.
Where the compulsivity, the numinosity of the sex, it wears itself out. It loses something, and it either in some movies can move into a deeper relationship, more spiritual, more combined body and soul experience, or it's just done. It's done. It's played itself out. It's almost as if that numinous energy is a starting point that doesn't necessarily get never finished, right?
And it plays itself out in this perversity, that with it, and it has to ratchet up more and more things that create that numinosity but there's a phrase I recently came across called dark numinosity. The shadow it's so shadowed that it will burn itself out in not a good way. I mean, we talked about that other movie, Bitter Moon, where they end up, I think, killing each other in some way because the perverse things that they have to do in a sexualized way keeps getting more and more disembodied, really.
Yes.
Disembodied, or lack of humanness, lack of the
Yes. Yeah, there's a great line in Female Perversions. In a perversion, there is no freedom. And that, I think that speaks to, there is both, this is, the Female Perversions was very Freudian, so everything was brought back to childhood trauma. From a Jungian perspective, there is the potential for something deeper, more transcendent, you know what I mean? Which I think is playing out in this film.
Oh, I agree. The potential is there. Consuela brings that to David. She's holding that potential. That's what she wants.
Yes.
She wants that emotional intimacy.
Yes.
And she can't understand. She loves she loves the adoration, like you're saying. She loves that, but not if it's split.
Not if the sacrifice her. Yes.
Right. Her whole person.
Yes, and she keeps bringing, all these different ways that she's bringing her individuality, her womanhood, her into the relationship. Even by the end of the film, bringing herself back to him. Was, I think, a way to re-engage and for him to see her humanness, even though she arrives at a place, apparently that she realizes that he's not going to be able to finish this. No.
Yeah. And why I think this film was so powerful for me too is that he appears to see her humanness, his emotion, all the crying that he does, the suffering, like we were saying before, the suffering of losing her. We have this idea in Jungian circles that suffering can be very transcendent, and we can individuating, but sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's just neurotic suffering. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Jung has that great line about unconscious suffering. If we suffer consciously, so what does that mean? We've connected the dots. We've done an inventory, of our own complexes and know what it's connected to, and then grieve and suffer consciously. Then we can change.
Yes. I think the line was. Unconscious suffering is an accident. That's what happens to him. Her dying is an accident, something for which he was unprepared. And that speaks to his lack of maturity. A man at 61 or 62 or however old he was should be quite aware of death, right? That this is a potentiality, but he's acting, this crying struck me as, this feels very neurotic. This feels, I'm losing my breasts, rather than this woman, this whole woman that is asking to be completely loved and not just an aspect of her.
Right. That's really, the unconscious suffering is an accident. That's great.
So the suffering that you're talking about is conscious suffering. It's something that we voluntarily move into.
Right. Yeah. There's a line I came across too, where the root meaning to lust. Let me find it in my notes. Lust in Old Germanic language means religious joy.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it fits right in with the sacred prostitute.
Yes, it does. Wow. That is amazing that we've devolved. The language is devolved in this split to just something that's sexual. We were talking about the cultural influence, this whole experience with my practice with young people and the dating apps and these dating, and this, the promiscuity of sex, the frequency of sex, it's almost as if they have sex before they talk. It's almost a given. You take somebody out for dinner and you expect to have sex. and there's no intimacy involved there.
No, right. As you were talking, I was thinking, the association I had, well, yeah, right, like sites like Tinder. Well,
Yeah.
It made me think of the line in the book. There's a line in the book, and it may be part of it. George and he may be having a conversation about it. I can't remember if it's in the film exactly, but he says, let me find it. You're going to rule out dominance. You're going to rule out yielding.
Yes.
Dominating is the flint. Talk about Tinder. Am I confusing? Isn't something you start a fire with? Is that Tinder?
It's Kindling.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, dominating is the flint. It strikes the spark. It keeps it going.
Yes.
So, I thought when he talked about you're going to rule out dominance, you're going to rule out yielding, I thought of the Salenza book, Erotic Desolation.
Yes.
You need both, right?
Yes.
We're not trying to rule out. We're trying to balance out receptivity and potency.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. So Tinder does mean a dry, flammable material such as wood or paper. So you were right on there. It's another word for kindling.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it speaks to they're trying to get something going that's more whole.
Yes.
But they can't get
they
there.
Can't because they can't get the whole initiation.
Mm-hmm.
They just get the ritual. It's like initiations in fraternities. They just get the ritual portion. They get humiliation, but it devolves into that. It doesn't
power.
It's about power. It's not about the spiritual. There's no divine presence there to contain and hold and it's amazing. But I do want to that line around surrender. No, he uses the word yielding, as you said. So to him it's about power and yielding, like a dominant and submission. He doesn't talk about surrender, which is, Emmanuel Gent's article on masochism, sadism, and I forget this long title, but he talks about the difference between dominance and submission, which are just two sides of the same coin, which all have to do with a person. We're either dominant to a person or submissive to a person. And then he talks about surrendering. Surrendering is to a larger process, the larger service, like service to the goddess, like we were talking about.
Right. Oh, well, that's great. But it reminds me, there's another line he says when he's in this conversation about you're going to give up dominance, you're going to rule out yielding. He says, maybe this is just in the book, but he says, there's always opposing forces. Yes. So unless one is inordinately fond of subordination, one is always at war.
Yes. So
he can't recognize that if he could submit and be subordinate to something larger, then there doesn't have to be always war. That can fuel the relationship in a deeper way.
Yes.
And we can switch back and forth. Even Salenza in her book says we're not going to choose one of these without the other.
That's right.
She says the same thing that Roth says in the book.
Yes.
We need both.
We need both, and it needs to, as Jessica Benjamin is, the doer or done to. It's this. We need to recognize the other's otherness, and be willing to recognize the other's uniqueness and differences, while at the same time being willing to assert one's own truth, one's own self, and. When that collapses into dominant submission. Right.
The feminists have a theory back in the 80s they called self in relation. So it's, maintaining a self, but connecting with another in, like you're saying, mutual recognition.
Yeah.
In recognition.
You know, the scene that really gets to me, and this is maybe my hospice background, that she is quite naturally pouring her heart out about her misgivings, her losses, that which she's always imagined she would do. Now she's realizing she can't. Calling her father Papa in Spanish, she would deliberately call him Dad in English because she's American and she wants to be identified in English, and she's grieving the fact that she never wouldn't call her father Papa, or the Spanish title for that. And then all of her grieving about Cuba and never being able to go back. He can't be with her. This, I think, speaks to his inability to be in his own mortality. He keeps telling her, no, you're not going to lose your breath. No, you're not going to be deformed. No, you're going to be able to go to Cuba. No, don't worry about your father. Your father loved you. Never mirroring her, never really being with her during a stage of life, and this confrontation with her dying, that requires her to come to terms with that which she has lost, that which she is having to give up, that which she is grieving. He couldn't be with her in that.
No.
As if it was too threatening to him.
Yeah, I think that's maybe speaks to the age issue, because she would be the age of her father, and he doesn't want to look at that at all. In fact, that's why, I think it's a smokescreen, right? For the lack of emotional intimacy. But I think maybe that's why. Maybe
that's interesting.
He was always, he has a line where he says he was always aware of that every second.
Yes.
That's the age issue. And there's that great scene in his fantasy where she's coming up the stairs to the Lincoln Center, and he imagines, this is when he's feeling jealous, that he imagines some younger man coming and taking her away, because that's what he would have done and did do his whole life.
Yes. He was the younger man.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
I think go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, there was a line that just came to me in the movie where she says, after she tells him that she's got cancer and such, that she says, "For the first time, I feel older than you."
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes, because he's broken down. He's weeping, and she's trying to be stoic and accepting this.
Yeah.
And because he's like in a puddle, like a child.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about, I think we talked about this before in one of our pre-podcast discussions of how he's such a Puer.
Yeah, he is.
And yet he's such a Senex on the outside.
Yeah.
Everything is ordered, he's so rigid. But inside, he's not able to grow up at all. In this emotional intimacy area.
That's interesting. The Puer in him, and she's more Senex because she is grounded. She's grounded in her body. She's grounded in herself. And the discussion they have in the film that I think is more developed in the book is around the metronome. And he tells her that the metronome, because I think she asked, they're talking about music, and she asked about that. Artists, even the best of musicians, have a tendency to rush. In the film, they say accelerate, a tendency to rush their music. So they use the metronome to keep them on beat. It's such an image of mortality to me. It's nature's time. It's time. It's that's Senex, right? Senex is in the realm of time and space, and it's the Puer that wants to rush. Right? It's the Puer that wants to rush ahead to the next fantasy, like Peter Pan, the next adventure, right? And he had, Peter Pan has no memory of what went on before that because he's not interested in that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But she holds a lot of Senex energy for him.
I agree. What I think, that's great to focus on that, because to me, when you say that, it also reminds me of this manic sexuality. I would call it manic.
Yes.
Every year, choosing a woman. Let's just make the notches in the belt of how many women he's had.
Yes.
And there's a manic feeling to it.
Yes. And you mentioned the son. I think, his inability to move into his manhood, because I think all of that sexual compulsion was ultimately a way to avoid it. Even if he thought he was more manly, I think ultimately to move into one's manhood is to come to terms with one's mortality and to have a different relationship to death. So he never could move into his fatherhood, which requires that, right? He leaves his son. Yeah. He has this, he never really shows himself to be the father. He's more competitive with his son. I think the movie tries to resolve it because they make the son the doctor, and then they have this intimate, moment at the end.
Right. And the son, it turns out the son is having an affair now. He's married and has an affair, so he's repeating his father's behavior.
But in the film, and I don't remember in the book, he comes to him with this dilemma. What do I do? And he's not much help.
No.
But the son in the film decides to tell his wife and stay with his wife, which suggests, perhaps a movement deeper into a relationship. It's like James Hillman's classic essay on betrayal. And betrayal's all over this film, right?
Yes.
The movement, he has a great line in there. He said, hidden in trust is the seed of betrayal, and hidden in betrayal is the seed of forgiveness, and that moves us into a deeper levels of love, from that childish love, right, that we start out with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great association.
And she was able to embrace the betrayal. She was betrayed by him, but she was able to move past that back into relationship with him at the end. I think that's very important.
Yeah, she wanted something from him for herself. I think she knew when she went. My fantasy is because she said it in the hospital room. I'll miss you.
Yes.
I think she knew the relationship was over and had been over and wasn't going to get rekindled. Yeah. But she wanted something from him very specifically for herself.
Yeah. What do you think the photographs were about? That's so interesting. She never picks up the photographs apparently, but she wants these photographs of herself.
Right.
Of her breasts, of him doing the photography, of him being involved in a very intimate. And I love the sequence in the film of her just being so open to this, but the look, her eyes, the look on her face, the grief, the pain of that was a very poignant scene.
It was. She very slowly disrobes and takes her shirt off, but full of pain and grief. Yeah, it was beautiful, really, really touching. She was present in her body.
Yes.
I think maybe it's just to know that they exist, and it's a way, it's a concrete object. Even if she didn't look at them or take them, that was the way they connected.
Yes.
Maybe it's holding on to something that they could have had but then lost.
Yes. There was a sense of immortality in that she was already thinking, what is she leaving behind? And he didn't go there yet. He was still, no, you're not going, you're going to be okay, in denial. But she was already thinking, what was she going to leave behind? And was she leaving that behind for him?
That's great.
To be able to hold her in mind after she was gone.
That's beautiful. I like that a lot. I do. Because then that fits with my, the archetypal idea that she's she's bringing this trickster energy. She's acknowledging that he's not there yet, maybe sometime soon.
Yeah.
And here's a token, here's a symbol
Yes.
of all that could have been. If you could, and the fact that it's her breast is, it's holding all that potential to move beyond it.
Yes.
He lost the woman, but he's got the breast. What does that mean to him?
Right.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, this whole struggle at the end just reminds me of the struggle at the end of life is one of many different situations, many different ways that it manifests. But it is ultimately a struggle between mortality and immortality, and the urge or desire to know what is left behind. Jung said, not to have a conception of life after death is a great waste. It's a great unfortune that we at least have to struggle with some conception of life after death, even if we have to admit failure. And to me, that is that speaks to this idea of the tension between immortality that really rises to a crescendo towards the end of life. It's what am I leaving behind?
Yeah, I have clients who talk about what will my legacy be.
Yeah.
Well, we may be close to wrapping up, and I just want to make sure to say these two quotes that I love.
Please do.
Jung famously said, "Where love rules, there's no will to power. And where power predominates, love is lacking. The one is shadow of the other." And I think in the film, it shows that, like you're saying, the push to have those two somehow come together, power of being human, and so and then the other line is, what comes being, if we embrace our humanness, there's a lot of power in that. And then the other line I love is, it comes from actually commentary on Genesis. The line is, "The power of love upsets the order of things."
Wow. Yes. Well, this speaks to the film. It upsets the order of things. That's beautiful.
And I mean, he says in the film and the book, love fractures you.
Yes. George says that. I think George, that comes out of George. Love fractures us. It cracks us. It cracks us open.
Well, we didn't just say these other great lines about attachment. And I don't think George meant that it opened us up. Actually, I think he meant, he says stuff like, attachment is ruinous.
Yes, he did say that.
Attachment is ruinous. Your enemy. Attachment is your enemy.
Yes. He
who forms a tie is lost. The eternal problem of attachment. He goes on to say, must be, I don't know if this is in the film, this need, this derangement.
Yes.
There's the lack of ability to be dependent.
Yes. Well, I think George is saying, and I think it's consistent with what you're saying, this cracking open, he is not describing as necessary or important. It's describing it in negative terms, that you can't let this happen. Love cracks. He's he wants to preserve David as this God. It's an interesting choice of words. We didn't go into the names. David as David from the Bible, who seduced Bathsheba. And suffered for that in terms of his relationship with God, and was denied the right to build the temple, right? That was left for Solomon. So this sin, the sin of Moses, I think it was called, was it's a perfect name for Coixet.
Uh-huh.
But Consuela means comfort.
Oh, it does. Oh.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was reading a book called a nonfiction book. It's called On Consolation. And it's the writer goes through many writers in the history, thinkers and theorists from history in terms of their writing about consolation. And the consolation is around comfort at the end of life.
Oh, perfect name.
Comfort with our mortality.
Wow.
So, okay. Do you think
I think we covered it.
Yeah, I think we did too.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I do love this film.
Yeah.
We never mentioned Carolyn.
Yes.
Who is the other woman we see him in relationship with, another former student that he had ongoing, that he chose to have sex with and that he's continued to have sex with every 3 weeks or so. I think she's a businesswoman.
Yeah.
She just gives him no commitment sex. That's all he wants. She's a comfort to him.
Yes.
Played beautifully by Patricia Clarkson. I love that actor. There's a really interesting scene in that I only caught second time around, where it's established very quickly that she's very different. He ends up lying to her, and just because he's in love with Consuela. Anyway, there's a scene where right in the beginning where Carolyn comes, they have sex, and they're in bed together after sex, and she notices the play ticket on his bedside table.
Yes.
And she says, "Oh, I didn't know you were reviewing plays still." He said, "Oh yeah, every once in a while." And she says, "Oh," she looks at it carefully. She says, "Oh, I'm going to be out of town then." And he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll go with George." And of course, we see that he goes with Consuela.
Yeah.
But to me, that said that even she was wanting something more than sex.
Yes.
And they have this great conversation after George dies. They're sitting together, Carolyn and David, on the couch, and she says to him something like, "This is the most intimate we've been all these years. We haven't talked like this. We're finally talking. She says, we kept acting like teenagers our whole lives. This is the most honest conversation we've had."
He says that.
He says that. He says that. Yeah.
Yes, and that's an interesting scene because that was not in the book. In fact, in the book, after the tampon scene where she discovers Consuela's tampon and accuses him of having an affair, and I think that story ends. Carolyn ends there, but in the film, she stays with him. She believes him. She stays with him, and then he reveals in that scene that that he's been in love with this woman, and but it's interesting. He says they both realize that they've denied each other the intimacy. He offers to take her to the airport because she was leaving.
Oh yeah.
And she says, "No, I start now." So to me, she is him in female form.
Yes.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And she's quite the foil to Consuela, and I think an important foil. Because this was all he expected out of life, right? Maybe she did want more. Yeah. But she didn't.
She couldn't get there like David.
She couldn't get there like David. Right. Yeah. Wow.
Well, this was wonderful as always, Dan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Till next time.
Yeah, and maybe it'll be Jean Dielman. Maybe
Jean Dielman.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, the #1 greatest film of all time, rated by Sight and Sound.
Yeah.
3.5 hours long of monotony until the end.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a lot we're going to talk about until we get to the end. We could talk about the end.
We could talk about the end for an hour. Yeah, we could.
Yeah. Well, we have other films to talk about too.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, archives, this podcast, or to find a Jungian analyst near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2021 donors who gave at the contributing member level or above: the Arlene M. Feiner Trust, Barbara Anand, Arlo and Rena Compan, Judith Cooper, Kevin Davis, George J. Didier, Mary Doherty, Carl and Patricia Greer, Ryan Mayer, Patricia Martin, Boris Matthews, Sue Rosenthal, Diane Sherwood, Debbie Stutzman, Lawrence Chad Tingley, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, Gerald Weiner, and Ellen Young. You can also become a supporter of this podcast by visiting our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks.